Good morning. I'm Paul Monaghan, the National Director of Promise Keepers New Zealand, and I'd like to welcome you to this online broadcast. This morning we're talking about mentoring, imparting hope across a generation. Our guest this morning is Sam Tolley, who's the campus pastor for Church Unlimited in West Auckland, and he's a member of the PK board. Good morning, Sam.
Good morning, Paul. It's great to join you and all the other men around New Zealand.
Yep, we're looking forward to a great morning. So we'll charge on into it. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, unfortunately, I'm now just over 40. I don't like admitting it because I actually turned 40 during lockdown last year, and I'm hoping I can stay 39, but always like just framing that so people know I'm not too young and not too old. Dad of 2 kids, been married for 18 years. Unfortunately, for all the men outside of Auckland, I was actually born in Auckland, but grew up in a town called Blenheim. It's kind of, some people would like to claim it as a city. So been outside in the rural setting of New Zealand. Basically did my schooling, went to teachers college, became a PE teacher, did that for a year, and then God dragged me out of that, kind of kicking and screaming really, but I knew it was the right thing, and I've been working at Church Unlimited ever since.
Excellent. Yes. Well, I mean, people who are born in Auckland and actually return are quite a rare breed, I would imagine. So that's those who leave quite often just leave. So that's awesome. Okay. So how did you get interested in this topic?
Well, I guess the reality is, Paul, being in ministry, but also being in sports background, you see that people need help. And if they try to do it by themselves, whatever area, you don't really become all that you can be, and you need other people in your life. But what's really I find interesting in sport is you understand you need coaches, you need people alongside you, you need help. But then you come into the spiritual setting, and it's like the Bible talks around this, but you don't see it happening as much. And I guess I journeyed as a youth pastor, and you see that you've got all these young people with potential, but it's just potential until somebody comes alongside them and help them. And then if you get a little bit spiritual, you read through the Gospels and you see that Jesus grabbed 12 and basically he just mentored them for 3 years and nearly left them to it. And yes, Jesus turned the world upside down, but it was actually the 12 that went and expanded the kingdom, the 12 that went and made the difference, and then the 120. But you understand it was about coaching, it was about mentoring, it was about discipleship, and we're probably going to talk about that. But I think those 3 words are totally interchangeable.
Okay, that's interesting. So what I'm hearing you saying is there's a bit of exponential growth from mentoring.
Yeah, the reality is we can only do so much. And there's so many statements. I mean, even if you use Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing, it wasn't the 2 of them that got to the top of Mount Everest. It took a massive team to get them to finally stand on the summit. But the reality is there were hundreds of people climbing up Mount Everest. And if we're going to achieve what we need to achieve, what God's asked us to achieve, whether it be in a business sense, in a parenting sense, in the kingdom, wherever it is, we can't do it on our own. We need other people to help us, to be alongside us. And when they are, we can help them grow. And then together, we all do so much more than we could do individually.
No, it's good. That's good. Coming from as a motor racing fan, I get the idea of a team behind you. The driver's one person, but the rest actually make the thing go. So that's cool. Oh, good. Excellent. So how would you define mentoring then? So what does that look like?
Well, the thing is I think there's so much research out there right now, and you can read different books and people define it in sitting down in a committed, defined season of time. But I just think that really for us today, talking to men all around the country who are having their bacon and eggs or sausages or whatever you've had, that it's about getting alongside people and helping men, young people, just helping them become and bring to the fore what's inside of them, what God's already placed them there in kind of an intentional manner. It doesn't have to be committed. It doesn't have to be regimented or a certain time. There just has to be some intentionality. I like the word intentionality, where you're actually not just sitting down having a cup of coffee. There's actually this thought that I want to learn off you, and I know that you can help me develop something in my life. So there's just that intentionality. There's that thought that we're going to coach them, we're going to disciple them, we're going to help them develop in a certain area.
Okay, so do you have some examples from your own life that you might be happy to share?
Oh, I have a lot. Guys, I knew Paul was going to ask me this question. I think this will really help frame, and maybe I'll go back and define mentoring a bit more once you kind of understand this. So if I was to tell you, first of all, the first mentor in my life was, of course, my dad. And my dad taught me a whole lot of things. He was a military man, so taught me a lot about discipline. But of course, our fathers mentor us and they teach us things and they impart who they are. Probably the thing that I love the most, Dad was massive into outdoors and massive into sailing. So Dad taught me how to sail, and then I started yacht racing, and one thing led to another. And, I was spending too many hours out on the water yacht racing, but Dad mentored me in that. Probably the next mentor that comes to mind is my granddad. He's actually 100 and almost a one now. He taught me how to drive. He took me under his wing, and he was a farmer. He was involved in all sorts of boards, and his community spirit, but his interest in politics, just all different things. He took me under his wing. Then I think of there's a guy named Darren Gammy who was my principal at a Christian school. He imparted what he carried in the spirit, and he was probably my first Christian mentor without him saying, can I mentor you, or me coming to him and saying, can you be my mentor? He just imparted who he was, his love for worship, his love for the Holy Spirit. I to this day, I love meeting up with Darren. And when I do, that used to be Mr. Gammy. I was 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. When I meet him, I go, oh, don't call him Mr. Gammy, but Darren imparted so much into me. And then you fast forward later on, and Pastor Tak Barner, he's my father-in-law. He's been my boss. But man, have I learned so much from him. Have I ever sat down and said, Tak, can you be my mentor? No, I don't think we've ever had that conversation. That probably has a part to do with the fact that you just learn, because you're around those people. But at the same time, I've had specific people that I've got alongside and asked them to be my mentors in areas like parenting. So important. In areas like learning how to really be a pastor and developing that, I ask specific people to come and help me for certain seasons. Sometimes it's a year. Others have been 5 or 6 years. But I would say, do I have one mentor? No. I have many different mentors. Do I have one that I meet with every week or month? No, because different people are going to teach me different things.
Well, that's cool. So why, for the audience's sake, why should they get involved in mentoring?
See, I think that the first thing I would say, and when I was preparing for this, what I'd want to say to all the men out there, number one, first, do you have somebody who's still helping you? It doesn't matter whether you're 40, whether you're 20, whether you're 80. You can still have somebody who's helping to impart things into you. So first, you always want to be developing. But my take is, and if I look at my notes, the Bible's so clear. First, we know in men's circles, we always use that verse in Proverbs 27, iron sharpens iron. The only way we're going to really develop is not just getting along with God, although that's really important. We actually need to get around other guys and let them sharpen us and let them develop the kinks out in us. I mean, yes, marriage does that, but usually marriage more brings out the bad things that then we have to go and address. For all the married men out there, you know what I'm talking about. And then you add kids to the mix, and man, they bring out a whole nother side. But let's be real. We need other people to help sharpen us. That's how we sharpen a knife. We need other people to develop in us the things that we don't quite have mastered. So first of all, we need to be mentoring. But then if we don't mentor others, if we don't pass on what we've got, then other people can't rise up to what's in them. And I love 2 Timothy 2, verse 2. It says, find capable, faithful men and impart into them what you already have. And we all have something we can impart. And that's what I want to say to every man watching today. You have something that you can mentor into other people. And we have to see that the Bible talks about this so much. It talks about discipleship. It talks about teaching and encouraging. And the reality is I I want to introduce this thought here. It talks so much about the importance of parenting and fathering. And the reality is you kind of think, I've stopped being a father once our kid, well, you never stop being that dad, but you stop really fathering your kids at a certain age. But the reality is the church and the kingdom needs more and more fathers. There's a verse that talks about that so much. The Bible has lots of, the Bible says the kingdom or the church has lots of instructors or tutors, but not many fathers.
Okay, that's interesting. So what would someone who's starting to listen and pick up their ears, and what would they need to know starting out, do you think?
I think the reality is you don't need to know anything, because actually, and I'll clarify that. The reality is what you're going to mentor somebody in, it has to be something that you've walked through before. Now, doesn't mean you need to have been on the journey 10 years. You just need to be a few steps ahead of somebody in the journey to be helping them walk through or process through. So you don't have to know anything, because if you don't already know it, you're not going to be able to mentor somebody in that because you haven't experienced it yourself. See, it's not like you're going and finding a textbook and learning a whole lot of stuff. You actually just are imparting who you are and encouraging the people. So the first really thing, you don't need to know anything, but you just need to find people. And the first thing I'd say is you need to pray and say, God, who is in my life that I can mentor or help or support? Who have you put around me? And maybe they're in your church, in your small group, in your men's group. Maybe you can see other men in your life and you're like, man, I could so help them just develop to becoming all that God's called them to be. So it's more about a heart thing going, actually, if I don't do this, who is going to help them develop? And I think this is where this thought of generation to generation, and it's not about an age thing. It's about passing our faith on to younger believers or newer believers or people younger than me or older than me, but maybe older in age, but not older in experience or wisdom.
Okay, so that actually was my next question. So do you see it as being intergenerational, or do you just think there's got to be an experience difference? How do you see that working? Because you're talking about going up and down and sideways, and
I think, Paul, the reality is most of the time there's going to be an age thing because there's got to be an experience thing. And I think that's the key thing, is that you got to understand this is not about somebody who's gone and done years at university and become a teacher or a lecturer.
Yeah.
This is about people who have done life. And so that's why there's usually an age or hierarchy thing, if that makes sense. But it's not about that. It's about I've developed something in me that somebody else has actually got a desire. And guys, I'd say out there, sometimes the men you come to or the young people, because it doesn't have to be man to man. You know, you could bring we're talking to men at a men's breakfast right now, but it could be a group of young people who are men and women. Like, it doesn't have to be one-on-one. I think that's really important. It can be one on a few. You can't do one on 30. You can't mentor 30 at the same time. There'd be too many stuff to discuss. It's got to be individual and be able to connect. But I think the reality is that understanding that if we're going to pass it on to the next generation, which is so important, it's seeing they have to have that desire. Otherwise, you'll end up wasting time trying to teach somebody, and it's like you're in front of a bunch of high school students who really don't want to be there. Well, the reality is you can talk as much as you want, but if they're not listening, if they're not hungry for it, then they're not going to receive it. So sometimes you do need to find the people who are willing, who are hungry, who are faithful, who desire it. And that's what 2 Timothy 2 talks about, is finding those people who are actually hungry to learn. So that would be the place that I'd say is you need to start there and find that and be having an understanding on why we need to do it. And maybe, Paul, that's probably the question that we all need to ask ourselves is, why would I even do this?
And what was the reason when you first started doing it?
In kids' church, we always say the answer is Jesus. And guys out there, I think I want to say that the answer is, why would we do this? The answer is actually because the kingdom will stop at us. This kingdom will stop growing if we don't pass on our faith to the next generation. And I'll be really honest, I'm not going to be specific, but I look at other religions and I'm like, they have got this. they've got this understanding that if we don't really pass on our faith or our beliefs or our knowledge or experience clearly to the next generation, then it will die with us. And the reality is this is not just about kingdom. This is about work. This is about any area where you can mentor. But the most important thing in our lives is our faith, that is our relationship with God and understanding of the kingdom. And I think there's so many young people, or not so young people in the faith, who don't really understand Scripture. They don't understand the worldview that we should have as Christians, because no one sat down to actually have a conversation over a coffee or over a tea or over a meal, and it's all just about a sermon. Well, to be honest, it's about conversations. It's about being able to ask questions, kind of like what Paul and I are doing right now. That's how you really get to learn, because you answer the question that's in your mind. And when that gets answered, you learn. Or if your question doesn't get answered, you're stuck at that point. Well, what about this? And if you don't get a chance to stand up in a sermon and go, but Pastor, what about this? It's like you kind of stop your thinking and you stop your learning at that point. And I think my take on the whole of Christendom in New Zealand really is, it's so much about, what's the pastor going? What am I going to say to my people today on a Sunday, versus how are we developing? How are we mentoring? How are we growing the people around us? They could be the same age as us. They could be younger. How are we developing the men in our circles, in our lives? Because I've got something they can learn off me, and I've got something that I need to learn off them.
Okay. So, but I mean, Trevor actually had a saying that you've got to be supernaturally natural. So, I mean, and I go back to your original statement that Sunday school, you go back to the answer is Jesus. So it is that process. Some of it is that though we may be dealing with things that are not necessarily spiritually based, you are suggesting that we try and infuse our spirituality into that situation?
100%. I think if guys, if you're out there and you spend all your time mentoring people on non-spiritual things, you're missing the fact that everything is spiritual. You know, I think we fail as dads, as parents, as grandparents, if we spend all our time teaching our kids the things that we think they need to learn to succeed in life, but we don't actually really pass on a real relationship with our loving Heavenly Father. Because if they don't learn that, if they don't have the help that they need when they get into tough situations. And I feel that we've missed that. And it's really interesting when you read through the Old Testament, they talk about that so much, to remember what God's done, to let other people know what He's done in your life, so they don't miss the stories and the history that's gone on. And I think Trevor Yaxley was a very, very smart man. And it's true. Everything is spiritual. We can't dismiss that. But I think what I guess I'm saying is, we can't help people bring the spiritual into the natural. We can't help them learn how to do all this without the fact that we show them how to do it. And I think that's probably what I've kind of been hinting at a little bit so far, is what do you have in your life? Because that's what you can mentor. And I think the challenge is not right now, but you know, when you go home, you almost want to look in a mirror and ask yourself this question: who am I? What is happening in my life that I can pass on? And what's in me? Do I want to pass some of that on? Or maybe I need to develop that area a little bit more so that I can pass that on. A person who actually has mentored me from a far distance through books is John Maxwell. And he basically said, you can only pass on what you've already got, what you've already been through. That's what you can really teach and pass on. Otherwise, it's only head knowledge, and all you're giving them is more knowledge. But knowledge isn't what mentoring is about. Knowledge only puffs up our brain. But what they need to learn is the real wisdom, the application, how do I actually parent my kids? How do I help my grandkids develop in this? How do I help these people in the church who have some real leadership qualities rise up and become the spiritual leaders that they're called to be?
Okay. I mean, I was just thinking back as you're talking, Howard Hendricks described men talking about the laboratory of life. And in that process, he talked about sharing your strengths and your failures. I mean, how does that work in the mentoring sense? I mean, I'm just sort of thinking it's easy to talk about the things that work, but maybe the failures are just as important.
Here's my, I agree, but I don't agree, because if you talk about your failures and you haven't got through your failures, then all you're doing is having a counseling session with the other guys. So
True.
the reality is mentoring is being real. And if you're not willing to be real about the good things and the bad things, if you're not willing to be real about your marriage and how, man, we went through a rough 6 months, 6 years, I don't know, hopefully not 6 decades, but you know, if you're not being able to be real, then they're actually not really going to learn, because that's the learning. You know, you're passing on and saying, hey, I don't want you to go through those 6 months that I went through because I did this, and this is the learning from it. If you're in the middle of it, then that's not mentoring, because you're not passing it on. You're actually just sharing your struggle, really. And we, hey, men, if you don't have somebody to share your load with, you need to find that. I can't stress that enough. This is about mentoring. We're talking about mentoring or discipling or coaching, but a coach can't help other people go beyond something that they've learned. And it's just the same. We need to have people who can help us in our current situation, and we need to have people that we're helping who aren't quite in the same situation. So please go and find people who you can talk life with, but on top of that, find people that you can help them go through the battles that you've already won or the things that you've already faced. Because the reality is, you're in a storm right now. I'm in a storm. We're in a battle. We've always going to have battles. But, man, we want to help the young, well, not just the young people, the people in our lives who haven't faced those battles yet, so that they can go through them a little bit more successfully than we have.
Okay. So I just want to flip it around a little bit. So if I'm looking for a mentor, what would I look for in a person?
Somebody who's authentic. I think that's the number one thing. Somebody who you feel will tell you the truth. Like, I'm being real. Like, I don't want to sit down and hear their theory. I want to hear their reality. So that's what you're looking for. But you're wanting to look for somebody who I would say isn't perfect. There's no perfect person, you know. Christianity is not. That's not about finding perfect. You know, I'm not perfect. No one. The only perfect person is Jesus, and I don't think I'm talking to Jesus this morning out there in the men's breakfast. But what I'm saying is, you want to look for somebody who's real, but also somebody who's been through it. Like, you don't want to go to somebody who's never had kids and ask them to mentor or disciple or help you in the area of parenting, because all they can share is what they've read or what they've seen, not what they've been through. So you want to find somebody like that. And that's usually why a mentor is somebody who's slightly more experienced or mature than you, but they don't have to be older. They just have to have been through the things. I mean, you could easily have a dad who's, 6, 8 years younger than you, and they could help you because they had their kids younger in life. So it's not about an age, it's about an experience thing. But you want somebody who's got some battle scars, because they've been through it, they've experienced it, and somebody who's willing to share those battle scars, because that's actually what you want to hear and learn from.
Okay, so I mean, and the reason I asked the question was because once you find that person for yourself, you can also understand what you have to do. You have to be authentic. You have to be real. You have to do the success, the failures, the full 9 yards in this journey. You actually have to be, I guess, what I'm hearing you say, you have to be all in if you're going to do this.
If you're going to commit to this, I think the scary thing that when I first started out, I was thinking, man, if I ask for a mentor, they're going to want to meet with me every week. Well, the reality is, if I hear something that I need to apply into my life, you need to give me 2 or 3 weeks to actually work that through, and then to be able to come back and share what worked or what didn't. Or the reality is, actually, now this is going on and this has become the bigger battle. So I think it's not about, it's just somebody who's available. And sometimes the best mentors are the ones that you don't have to book an appointment with. You can just bring them on the phone and going, hey, I'm going through this. What should I do? Because if they can answer the question or give you 20 minutes of advice at that moment, that's perfect. I think the fact that you have to, now I've got to go and meet with my mentor for the next hour, that scares most guys. It's like, no, I don't want that. Actually, I want people who when I need it, I can send them a text or give them a phone call and know that they're going to reply. I mean, actually, if I'm honest, guys, 2 days ago, I sent an email to somebody who I would consider as a real spiritual mentor in my life. And I sent them an email saying, hey, I'm just really needing to process and discuss this area, and gave them not the whole story, just a brief outline, and said, hey, can we maybe talk sometime during this week and just chat through? And so I'm hoping that next week sometime I'm going to be able to sit down with them, or not sit down in person because we're still in Auckland, but that's a different story right now. But probably sit down kind of like this over technology and just talk through, because we're always learning. If you're not thinking you need to learn more, then probably it's time for you to beam up to heaven, because the reality, life is all about learning and growing and helping other people learn and grow.
Okay, no, it's good. That's good. So basically, part of the process is that it has to be good for both of you, really. I mean, to want to be a mentor, if it's difficult the whole way through doing this, you're not going to want to do it. And if it's difficult for you, it's probably difficult for them.
The reality is we don't like doing things that are difficult, and you need to set up the partnership. That's why you haven't heard me give any of you a formula on what it should look like, because as long as there's hey, I want to learn from you commitment, and sometimes you actually need to come to those people. And I'll give you an example. It's a young guy, and this is going back probably 15 years now, who I saw him coming through high school. He had real leadership on him. He had a real desire for God, but to be honest, he was hanging out with the wrong crowd. I knew God had something on his life, and I looked at him and I said, hey, I'm here and I'm always going to be here to support you. A couple of weeks later, I get a phone call and I have to go and support him because he'd been arrested and was going in front of the courts. Now, this was a young teen misdemeanor. Now, why am I telling you that? Because when we see potential in somebody, sometimes they don't come to us and say, can you be my mentor? We need to say to them and go, hey, don't use the word mentor. Don't use the word I'm going to disciple you, but just say, hey, I can see there's something on your life and I'm going to be here. And you actively just connect with them and chat with them. That is mentoring. So fast forward many years, this guy's now married. He's been on church staff for a number of years, and actually now he's left the church staff. And you know what's really interesting? I can't even imagine how he's got this job, but God has opened the job up where now he is connecting and basically supporting most of the young people at high schools right across Auckland. Like, it's amazing what he's doing. And he's got this team of pretty much, I think it's about 30 or 40 people underneath him. He is the youngest of the entire team, and he's the one doing it. Why? I played a part in that. I'm not saying it's anything to do with me, but I helped him and just kept being there for him. And sometimes this is what mentoring is. It's just seeing the potential in people and saying, hey, I just want to keep you developing to the place where God can really get a hold of you. And and I think we all have the ability to do that. We can see it in other people. I mean, the Apostle Paul, he saw it in those young guys around him, like Timothy. He saw it in him. He saw that there was something that on their life and they need help. All of us need help to bring it out. And that really what mentoring is. But Paul, can I share, because men's breakfast right now, we've probably eaten too much food already, but there's a real interesting verse in 2 Timothy 2, not 2, but 22. So 2 Timothy 2:22, where it talks about desiring solid food. And the reality is without us, and most of us have been through it with our kids, we want them to have milk because we want them to grow and develop. But if they're still having milk when they're 10 years old and not having solid food, they're missing out. And the reality is, men, we need to help the spiritual younger people around us desire steak. That's what it's about. As men, we want the real food. We don't want to have mashed potatoes. We want bacon and eggs. We don't want Weet-Bix this morning. We want the real food. We want to be having that. And that's what God says. And actually, it's all throughout Scripture. We need to be developing it. Let me just find the verse. Where is it? In 1 Corinthians 3, verse 2, it says, I had fed you with milk, not with solid food, because you weren't ready for anything stronger, and you still aren't ready. And the reality is, guys, I think there's so many of us men out around the country who we're still just sitting on the baby food of Christianity because no one's helped us develop. We're waiting each Sunday to be fed from the pastor on the stage because no one's actually sat down with us and showed us how to really read a Bible. No one sat down and really helped us to work out what is prayer? How do I actually talk to God? The things that some of us have learned along the way, well, it's so much easier if somebody sits down for a couple of coffees or whatever and just say, hey, do you know how to do this? Do you know how to pass on your faith to your kids? Because if we don't, as dads, pass on our faith to our kids, then who's going to do it? And can I tell you, it's not the Sunday school's responsibility. It's actually the mums and dads. It's the grandparents. And I think grandparents and aunties and uncles, we have that responsibility to pass on that faith and take that responsibility, because if we don't, the world is going to pass on other things to them that we don't want them to grab. And that is what mentoring is. It's getting alongside people and passing what's in here, what God's already developed, to them out there.
One of the things that I was sort of passing through my mind as you was talking is that it's that process of being example, and people are looking. They're actually looking for people to follow. And it is that process, the aunties, the uncles, whatever, the kids are looking. So I think that that's possibly a really important thing in our mentorship, that your walk is part of your definition. Would that be real for you?
The reality is if we're not going to teach them but mentor them, and that's what people want. They don't want a good idea. They want to receive what you've already been through. And 1 Corinthians, I've got it down here, 11 verse 1, follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. The reality is, if you do what you see Jesus did on earth, if you do what God's asked you to do and you've developed that in your life, then you can help other people follow your example. We don't have to have it all together. No one is perfect. And I think people out there need to understand you don't have to be perfect, because I'm not perfect. Paul hasn't told me, but I'm sure he's not perfect. I probably need to ask his wife that.
Yeah, that's probably a better answer. Yes, indeed.
But the reality is, right now, guys, we don't have it all together. But in some areas, we've won battles, we've seen some victories, we've got to a better point, and that is what we can pass on. And as long as we've got it somewhat together, then we can pass that on. But the thing that we need to be able to do is we need to be real. We just have to be honest and saying, look, I haven't done it perfectly. And maybe your kids have all left home, and maybe even you don't have much contact with your grandchildren. But I really felt that it's in my spirit, guys, today, that our responsibility is maybe we haven't done it right, but we can still pass on to another generation and to another group of people around us. And even if your kids are off the rails, that doesn't mean you still can't help other people learn from what you've learned, or help other people find God for themselves. And I just think, don't worry about, I'm not good enough. No, what have you experienced? Are you passing that on to somebody? Because we can all pass it on. We can all mentor people. And the reality is, like the Bible says, there's not enough fathers. There's not enough mentors out there. There's too many people saying, do this because I haven't done it. Take my advice, I'm not using it. That's not Christianity. Christianity is follow my example. I'm going to lead from the front, like the All Blacks do. Man, sorry, guys, I just have to say, I'm still a little bit angry about that rugby game on last Saturday night. I hope tonight's going to be a lot better. But I was sitting going, this is soccer, not rugby. But that's the reality. Is Christianity isn't about just kicking the ball forward and hoping somebody else does the work. Sorry, South Africans out there. It's about taking the hard job for yourself and then bringing people through with you. And the reality is, I was actually getting really angry and I was getting passionate. And I guess that's what I want to say this morning, guys. If you're passionate about a certain area, I'm passionate about parenting, not because I've had a bad experience myself, but I realize that if we don't grab our kids and really pass on our faith, then they're not going to walk with God. And I'm passionate about that. So the area that you're really passionate about, maybe it's a personal relationship with God. Maybe it's being a spiritual businessman. Maybe it's learning how to have a good marriage, like you've seen or you experience bad and good things in your marriage, and you're like, man, I want to help other people in that. whatever you're passionate about, that's where you should be mentoring, because you're going to have that desire to keep doing it. So I hope that kind of just helps put some context to that thought that, we don't have to be perfect, but if we're passionate about an area, we're going to want to help other people in them.
Absolutely. No, just sort of thinking, what would you say was the most important? And I know you didn't want to talk about skills, but what do you think is the most important skill that somebody would need to be a good mentor?
Passion. But that's not a skill. That's a desire.
No, it's not a skill.
I think, again, I don't think there's any skills they need. They need willingness. They need passion. They need availability, honesty. And so maybe the only skill they need, and I can't tell you what it is they need to have experienced it themselves. That you don't need a skill. You don't need to be a good communicator. You don't need to. The reality is, all of us, every single one of you who are watching this morning, you can mentor people. Just don't try and mentor them in an area. Like, I can't mentor any pilots. I've never flown a plane. Okay, I can't do that. There's probably so many. I can't mentor people in actually building, because I can't really swing a hammer to save my life, But there's other areas where I've got lots of experience in, and I can mentor people in that. So do you need any specific skill? No, you can all mentor people. Just don't try and do it in the areas that you don't have some scars from.
Okay. I mean, me as a coach, I'm sitting there going, okay, maybe listening might be a really good skill to develop in the process. I'm just thinking, sometimes I guess for me, it's somebody who listens to me actually will help me, because they're actually answering the question I'm asking. I don't know. How does that work for you?
Okay, so if we're going to be really, really dial it down, probably the reality is you need to be able to communicate and have thought through, how do I articulate what I've experienced? And so probably the skill, first of all, is you need to actually be able to stop and reflect on what you have been through. Because if you haven't stopped and reflected on what you've learned, you can't actually communicate that. But then you need the ability, maybe not like myself, like most preachers, we need to have the ability to stop and shut our mouths, because there's probably only 5 minutes of teaching or explaining we need to do, and the rest is answering the questions, because then we're helping them really grasp it. So yes, it's listening, but it's being able to hear the questions and then re-articulate or re-communicate what you're trying to mentor them in, because the reality is everyone thinks differently than we do. There's an amazing book. I haven't actually read it. I've just read the title, that says everyone's normal till you get to know them. And the reality, everyone you're going to try and mentor is different than you. So you have to be able to understand what you've learned, understand what you're trying to pass on to them, and then be able to listen to what they're asking so you can put it into their understanding. Because every generation thinks different, but every man thinks different, and we need to be able to put that into their context.
No, it's good. Yeah, that's kind of where I was going, sitting there thinking it's that process of listening and hearing their hearts, I guess. I mean, you talked heart, so it is that hearing of the heart and going, what do they actually want? What are they looking for here? Rather than me jumping in deciding what they need, actually hearing their heart and going, actually, maybe this is what they need.
I think we come back to this thought in the Bible that there's too many teachers, too many tutors, not enough fathers. And even if you've never actually had a child of your own, we understand the concept of fathering, that it's about time. Our kids need time. The people we're mentoring need time. They need our heart. If you don't have a heart for the person you're mentoring, it doesn't mean you need to love them but you need to have a burden or a desire to see them develop. And I think some of the best mentors are the ones who are ecstatic. They're not just happy. They're so super excited when the people, you can't mentor them anymore because they've learned everything off you and they're actually gone beyond you where you have been. And so I think it's about that fathering heart and understanding that the biggest area all of us can father or mentor in is spiritual areas, because the world is hungry for the spiritual, but they just don't quite understand it. They're looking for answers. They're looking for solutions to their problems, and the answers found in Jesus. It's found in the Bible. It's found in the kingdom. And it's not just turning up to church. It's actually having a real relationship with God. And the reality is, so many of us kind of understand it up here. Oh, yeah, I need to pray. I need to read my Bible. But why? And when I read my Bible, what am I meant to be getting out of it? And I think today, if I could pass it on, if you don't know how, find somebody who you think has that, because you don't really know if they've actually got it, but you think they do. You're pretty sure they do. And say, hey, can you help me? Because I don't really know how to actually really pray. I don't really know how to read my Bible. I try and spend some time in it, but it's, to be honest, it's a little bit of a waste of time. But you got to learn it for yourself so that you can help the coming Christians, because one day we're going to see lots and lots of people get saved and flood into our churches. The Bible prophesies it. But if we're not ready, then we're still having the milk. We're not on the solid foods ourselves to be able to show other people how to have those solid foods. So I think that's my desire as a pastor, as a dad, as a husband, that I want to help people so they don't face the battles or get scarred as much as I have. But I also want to help people so that they can find the freedom that they find in Jesus. But they're not going to do it through a sermon. They got to actually have somebody almost holding their hand, walking them through those things, and knowing that actually mentoring isn't about, or fathering isn't about for life. It's for a season. It's for a moment in time to help them get from point A to point B, and then maybe you help them to point C, but that might be a different topic or a different relationship.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, and I think that those sorts of things, I mean, for part of what I hear you saying is this is probably a really as the greatest single weapon in the kingdom expansion, that if we would just get in and listen and talk and share our understandings, then the kingdom would expand rapidly. Because, we're all, I guess we're bound up by fear that people will think that we haven't got it together or this or that. So, that's really interesting. One of the things that I suppose being in Auckland, you become very aware of how isolated you can be, because we've been locked down for what we're up to. We'll be, by the end of it'll be 7 weeks. And I, for myself, I see a lot of fear in people's eyes when I go for a walk with the dog. So how would you respond to that from a mentoring sense?
We need each other. We need human contact.
Absolutely.
And the Bible talks about it. The Bible talks around the fact that everyone is needed in the kingdom of God. Every part is important. And so you all have a role. And if you think, I don't need mentoring, then you probably just need to say, God, open my eyes so I can see where I need to still develop. Because the reality is we all need areas where we need help in, and there are different people who can help us in that. But then the second side is actually I am needed to help other people. I am needed to be a father, to be a mentor to others around me. We can get alongside people and we can have a real conversation and even agree to disagree. That's okay. But that's where mentoring needs to come in. We can help people analyze the fear that's going on. I mean, I cannot believe how much fear is around in the communities. And if more mature, stable Christians are not getting along the newer ones in the faith and giving them perspective, that's fathering, to giving them a fresh perspective. Because it's not through a sermon that's going to do that. It's actually through sitting on the phone, or it's sitting down and seeing somebody of you outside of Auckland now and saying, hey, what are you learning? Honestly, it'd be a great way to mentor even families, because mentoring doesn't have to be man and man. It could be you and your wife getting us alongside another husband or wife and helping them together, parenting or anything. And I just think we need to be willing to share what we've learned, but understand we have something to offer. And COVID right now actually highlights the need for other people and those relationships that are needed.
No, that's good. That's good, because I'm also hearing the concept of that the setting doesn't matter quite so much as we may think. You don't have to sit with a cup of coffee or any of those things. You can do what we're doing, or or meet over. Guys could be talking over a car or anything. Would that be?
Or the golf course.
Oh yes, well.
So I mean, I think that's the reality for men is what's going to be better is if you go for a bike ride or you're fixing a car. It's always said if you've got a teenage son, the best thing to do, or maybe a daughter, is get them in a car and go for a drive. You know why? Because you're not connecting eye to eye, but you're busy doing something, and then you really have some deep and meaningful conversations. And I, as a pastor, some of the best mentoring sessions I've ever had is when I've grabbed somebody, a young person or two, and they don't have to be young. I've just asked somebody to come and help me. And I've been able to mentor them while we've been doing a building project, or we've been dropping something off to somebody's house, or picking up, it's just as you do life, realizing that if I drag somebody along with me, I can be there with them. So, I've been mentored on the golf course. I've been mentored in a sailing boat. I've been mentored so many times on tramps. And to be honest, that's the gold, is when you don't really realize you're being mentored, but you actually are. So my encouragement is that it is about time. It is about stopping and going, actually, if I give them time, I will be able to mentor them. And I know for myself, it's far easier to do it, not over a coffee, but while we're just doing life together.
That's good, because old PK Legend would say that some of the most important things happen when you're doing the road trip to the event and the road trip from the event, talking about what's going on or what you're bringing, So I hear you, what you're saying. It's just the conversation. It's just the conversation.
It's just the conversation.
Yeah. What might stop us doing this?
I think what stops us doing this is one, thinking, I don't have anything to pass on. And I think the reality is there's an insecurity, there's I'm not good enough. Well, the answer is you're not good enough. We're only saved by grace. And so don't think you need to qualify. It's just actually realizing that there is a huge need in the body of Christ right now, and in the wider community, for fathers, for mentors, for disciplers, and you are needed. And be willing to do it. And when you start, you just make sure you start in an area that you are confident enough in to say, I can do this. And just start. So don't be, what if I do it wrong? The reality, you spending time with somebody, however it looks, in whatever setting, it will make a difference in their life. It will tell them that you believe in them. And sometimes it's literally one session, whatever it looks like, wherever it looks like, each year for a number of years. And actually that will make a massive difference in a person's life. But it's just that ability to know, actually, I do have time to do this, because we can make time for whatever's important. We always make time to watch the rugby, most of us. We can find time to do it. So that is my take, is we have the time, and don't worry, you're never going to be good enough. We're never good enough. Okay. But if you've experienced it, then you can father, you can mentor.
That's interesting, because it would seem to me that this is one place that we can be the head, not the tail, where the church can step up and actually affect the community around us simply by being available in any situation.
Absolutely. So please, can I implore you out there, really, that the church needs to be there for the others in our community. Years and years and years ago, well before I can remember, it was the church at the center of the community, and it was built around strong family dynamics. Right now, people don't know what strong family dynamics look like because they've never seen it. And so if you've experienced, you can show other people that. And that could be some of the best mentoring sessions anyone can ever have, just hearing how they do family. Because if people have come from a broken home, or their dad wasn't around as much, or whatever happened, just hearing and having advice can radically change so many people's eternal destiny, just by understanding what a good family looks like.
Excellent. So it is very much it's a place of let it begin with me. And I guess each of us has got to make that decision. You have to make that decision. I have to make the decision to actually share my life with other folks.
Start today.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks, Sam, for your exciting insights into mentoring and sharing time with other folks. I really feel that there's a great beginning for people today. So I want to thank you for your time. I want to really encourage you out there to go forth and do something. So thank you for your time. We look forward to hearing from you with all your great results.
Thanks, Paul, and thanks so much, PK.